Well, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us for Savannah Jewish Family Services Food for Thought program. Please note, if you have any questions during the program, please write them into chat. We'll have Q&As at the end. I'm honored to introduce today's speaker, Muhammad Darwashi. Muhammad is a leading political analyst and expert on Jewish-Arab relations within Israel. He has distinguished himself as a leader amongst Israeli Arabs and an internationally respected advocate for unexpected and hopeful ways of envisioning the Middle East future. Muhammad is the director of the Center Equality and Shared Society at Givat Haviva, a nonprofit dedicated to strengthening relations and promoting civic equality between Israel's Jewish and Arab citizens. Givat Haviva took part in our film festival this past year when Yaniv Sagi, the CEO, led the discussion about the movie Kiss Me Kosher. We're so thankful to continue the relationship with Givat Haviva by having Muhammad here with us today. Thank you for joining us, Muhammad, and I know you're driving, so in a few minutes when you get to your office, we would love to also see your face. And Daron, we would love for you to take the stage.
Sure. Sonny, thank you very much for having us, and to the Savannah Jewish Federation as well for hosting us. I will give just a little bit of background on Givat Haviva and on Givat Haviva Education Foundation, and then I'll hand it over to Mohammed to take over. So the Center for Shared Society at Givat Haviva is an NGO that is dedicated to promoting mutual responsibility, civic equality, and better understanding between Israel's Jewish and Arab citizens. It was founded in 1949, and for many, many decades, Givat Haviva was focused on coexistence. And in recent years, we decided to alter our focus a bit to focus on shared society work in Israel, meaning that we were more focused on empowering Israel's Arab citizens, focusing on equality, and focusing on education. And Givat Haviva has a number of programs that do just that. We have Hebrew language enrichment, where we send Jewish native-speaking Hebrew-speaking educators into Arab middle schools to teach weekly classes on Hebrew language and culture. We have Barham High Tech, where we provide college-level computer science courses to promising Arab high school students. Through Others' Eyes, which is an art project that connects Jewish and Arab teenagers to learn about one another through the realm of photography. And Shared Communities, where we pair Arab and Jewish villages and towns that have close proximity to one another, but prior to our involvement had next to no relation to one another. And I work for Givat Haviva Education Foundation here in New York City. We are a nonprofit, a US-based nonprofit that supports and empowers the work of Givat Haviva in Israel, spreading its message to American audiences just like you. Mohammed, did I miss anything?
Hi, Doron. Just in 1 or 2 minutes, I'm in the parking lot, so you don't need to worry about me driving. I'll be stopping in a second as soon as I find a parking spot. But Doron, no, you didn't miss anything. First of all, good evening to everyone. I'm very honored to be with you for this program. Sorry for the technicalities, but traffic Thursday evening in Israel coming out of Tel Aviv seems to be a very difficult mission. I would start by saying that, Doron mentioned two terms. He mentioned the term coexistence, and he mentioned the term shared society. And I would like to, now I'm parked, so everything is safe. And I would like to take some time to maybe go into those two terms and try to explain them.
Oh, Muhammad, you're muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. While I was putting the phone in some kind of a stable condition, I pushed the wrong button. So I'd like to take the two terms that Doron mentioned, coexistence and shared society, and put them into some kind of a logical framework to try to understand what do they mean and why they're different. I mean, many people think the term coexistence is a nice term. Actually, this was a term that was in use even by Givat Haviva, I would say, for many, many years, from 1963, when Givat Haviva formed the first Jewish Arab Center for Peace in Israel's history, with with the first organization to work. Oops, it wasn't stable enough place for the phone. Sorry about that. When we formed the first Jewish Arab Center for Peace, it was using what we call the social contact theory, trying to bring Jewish and Arab kids to meet with each other, to interact with each other. The concept and the idea was what you call in America maybe the social contact theory. Bring people to interact with each other, have music with each other, what we call culture sharing. And the assumption was that through social contact, Jews and Arabs can learn to live with each other. Now, when we talk about Jews and Arabs, who are the Arabs we're talking about? It's Israel's Arab citizens. That's the focus of Givat Haviva. We work with the almost 1.7 million citizens of Israel, comprising about 17% of Israel's population. Many use the percentage 21%, which is actually including the additional 4% who are East Jerusalemites. And many say or think that Israel's Arab citizens are 21%. That's not true. It's 17% citizens plus 4% residents of East Jerusalem. They do not have citizenship. They have a status of residence, such as green card holders in the United States. They do not vote to the Knesset, and they do not qualify for Israeli passports. They get some kind of a temporary travel document that is that usually lasts for probably a couple of years, no more than that. And if they stay out of the country for more than 2 years, they lose their Israeli residency. That's not the case with 17% of Israel's population, who got the citizenship by being part of the state of Israel from day one, 1948. At the beginning, the state of Israel didn't know what to do with the leftovers of the Palestinian people who lived here. I know what's the term leftovers, but it was really the remainders of the Palestinian people, mostly the weakest of the weak, the poorest of the poor. Many villages in the Galilee, about 70% lived in the Galilee at the time, which was mountain topography, and it was a very secluded agricultural community. And the state, as I said, didn't know what to do with them, so it placed those Arab towns and villages under military administration until 1966, which basically was trying to keep Arab citizens in some kind of a temporary status to prevent their integration in Israeli society, for the possibility of population exchange between Israel and the Arab world in future conditions. To take the Jews into Israel and to give out the remainders of the Palestinian people. This never happened. And in 1966, the state decided to legitimize Arab citizens completely, lifted the military administration, and started the civic relationship, started relating to Arab citizens as full citizens and not as temporary citizens, which was a very unique situation, because at the time, the Arab citizens themselves started realizing that, one, their citizenship is going to be permanent and it's not a temporary matter. And the state discovered that also it has a responsibility towards its citizens. So it's not just legitimizing citizenship, but also starting to invest in infrastructure development, education, and so on and so on. It's what I call the beginning of the Israelization of the Arab citizens. That was 1966. With time, we got exposed to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza after the war in 1967. And in 1970s, we can say that a parallel track to the Israelization got started. And that track, we can call it re-Palestinization. So we're going through two processes at the same time, even as we speak today. One is deeper Israelization that takes place every single day. And the second is re-Palestinization as we talk. The true test of this formula came in the 90s. In the 90s, Israel started negotiating with the PLO, with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, about end of conflict. And it's what's called the Oslo agreements. And the Oslo agreements were very unique for Arab citizens because at the beginning, we felt sort of insulted that we're not part of the solution, that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict considered us as a part of the problem, but when they're talking about the solution, we're not part of the solution. With time, we comprehended that that's actually the best thing for us because it left us where we are, left us at home, left us in our towns and villages, which is something we wanted. We didn't want to become refugees, not even in a future Palestinian state. But also with time, we learned how to become Israelis. I'm not only speaking about politically, I'm also speaking about educationally, going to Israeli universities, economically, learning the skills to work in Israeli economy, socially, the way we dress, the food we eat, the language we speak, which includes a lot of Hebrew in it, for example, the political behavior, considering the Knesset as our parliament and not the Palestinian Authority parliament, and not the Jordanian parliament, and not the Egyptian parliament. We had our own leadership. We had our own, what I would call, third identity. There is the Israeli Jewish identity, there's the Palestinian identity, and there's the Israeli Arab identity, which is a hybrid identity, which includes, I would say, maybe 80% Palestinian and 80% Israeli. Now, that surprises you probably because you probably hear the first time someone saying, my identity is not 100%, my identity is maybe 160%, which is true. That's exactly how we feel. We feel maybe not 100% similar to Israeli Jews in our status in Israel. There is still a lot of discrimination against Arab citizens. Arab citizens, 92% of Arab citizens still live in separate Arab towns and villages. There's no proper integration in the larger Israeli society. And if you go to the educational system, it's even more segregated. Only 7 mixed schools exist out of 4,800 schools in Israel. The separation in education and in physical residential structures is very, very obvious in Israeli society. So this separation allowed 2 processes to develop. One process, which is the political identity, which is different than the rest of the Israeli Jewish population. It has that component of Palestinian identity / Arab regional identity. But at the same time, there was the marginalization of the Arab community, discrimination in budgeting, and causing a number of phenomena. One phenomena is poverty. 47% of Arab citizens are below poverty line. 47%, compared to about 11% of the Jewish population in Israel. We're talking about citizens. We're not talking about people that immigrated to Israel. I always say, I didn't immigrate to Israel, Israel immigrated to me. And Israel failed to bring the process of economic integration to the proper place. Today, summarizing 73 years of citizenship, the result is 47% poverty. That's very bad condition. And that yields a lot of other results, such as very high crime rate. Almost 65% of the murders in Israel are within the Arab community, which is only 17% of the population. Almost 45% of the casualties of traffic accidents is within the Arab community, whether it's related to infrastructure of the roads, or if it's related to the age of the cars, or if it's related to the culture of driving of people that come from difficult social economic background. So enough describing the problem. Now, what do we do to try to solve it? For for decades, until about the year 2000, the theory which was most dominant, was what's called the social contact theory. That Jews and Arabs, all what they need to do is to get exposed to each other as human beings. And it's called the social contact theory, as I said. And time will do its work, and Jews and Arabs will learn to live in peace and coexistence with each other. Uh, with time, we started realizing the deficiencies in this theory, because coexistence you can also have between a horse and a rider, where you have also hierarchy, where you do not have equality. And slowly, the Arab citizens started getting fed up with this theory of coexistence. We ridicule this theory today by calling it hummus coexistence. So we come and meet and we eat hummus together, and we can even sing peace songs together and maybe have dance and dabka together. But then Jews go to their privileged life as first class citizens, and Arabs, they go for their underprivileged life as second class citizens. And with time, as I said, the Arab community started pulling out of those kind of encounters, which felt as if all what they do is make the Jews feel better at the end of the encounters, because they came and they sort of volunteered their time to be nice towards the Arab citizens. And the Arab citizens felt that this was a waste of their time because it didn't do much. So the knee-jerk reaction of, let's call it, the industry of Jewish Arab relations, all the organizations that were active in this field in the years 2000 until 2005, was that, okay, if good relations is not the solution, and you don't want to come and be nice to each other and eat hummus, let's try to talk about the problems. Let's allow the elephant into the room. Talk about the problems. Talk about inequality. Talk about the identity of the state. The question, whose state is it? Is it the state of the Israelis, or is it the state of the Jews? Let's open all the wounds and put them on the table and have that debate. Very quickly, we started realizing that this theory could do more harm than good. I mean, yes, maybe it's very educational because you get to know the other very well. You get to understand their perspectives. You get to understand their complaints, their aspirations. It's very educational for sure. But at the same time, it can assert stereotypes in the past, but it also highlights the gaps. It doesn't talk about the areas of commonality. Narrative debate and identity debate speaks about the differences and not about the commonalities. In some of the evaluation sessions that we did, we were asking kids, what did those encounters do to you? And some of the answers were as harsh as, I used to hate Arabs, now I know why, or I used to hate Jews, now I know why. So those kind of encounters, I would say, don't do it at home. It could be very dangerous. If you don't know how to manage it, it's easy to unpack the problems. It's very hard to repack them. It's what I call the returning home syndrome is the most difficult part. How to repack a conflict that you opened after 1 or 2 days of an interaction or an encounter, and that that is a very dangerous business. Don't do it at home, and it takes time, and it doesn't work as a single event. You need it, as you know, now everyone is getting their immunization for the COVID. You need a lot of shots for this until you develop some kind of immunity and you're able to handle this kind of situation. A lot of vaccine sessions in the process, how to handle this matter. With time around the year 2005, 2006, we started developing, and that started actually at Givat Haviva. We started developing a third concept, which is a concept that speaks about common interests. So we don't have to like or dislike each other. So we might like eating hummus together, we might like culture sharing, or we might not like it. That's one. We might agree or disagree on narratives. Those are the two earlier theories. But at the same time, we have the same economy. We have the same job market. We have the same shopping malls. We have the same roads. I just witnessed the same traffic jam that all other Jews witnessed. So we have the same concern of how to solve traffic jams, the same environment, the same universities, the same crime which spills over because crime doesn't know national identity boundaries. They follow the money. So if they don't have enough good cars to steal in my village, they'll go to the nearby Jewish town to steal a more expensive car. So crime doesn't know borders. So we do have vested interests. This started by the creation of something called the Authority for Economic Development of the Minorities Sectors at the Prime Minister's office, a special authority that said it's in Israel's interest to integrate Arab citizens inside Israel's larger economy. One, because they will stop being an economic burden, and actually we can turn them into a good investment for Israel's economy. Instead of having very high poverty rate in the Arab community, which at the time was 67% poverty rate, today I started by saying it's 47%. That's good news in comparison to 15 years ago. It was 67% poverty. And every person that went out of poverty stopped being recipient of welfare and started becoming a taxpayer, making not only himself richer, but making every other Jewish citizen richer. It's good for everyone. There's a win-win condition into this matter. Now, this theory started developing or started yielding a number of what I would call islands of success. One island, and I hope you wouldn't need it, is in the medical industry. If you come to Israel and you need to go to a hospital, you'll find that 23% of the doctors in Israeli hospitals are Arab. We're only 17% of the population, but 23% of the doctors. You'll find that 35% of the nurses are Arab. You'll find that 35% of the dentists are Arab. You'll find that 55% of the pharmacists are Arab. So this is over a representation. We are beyond our proportional representation in the medical industry. Now, what happened there? Two things. One, capacity building in the Arab community, developing a very strong appetite for education, but also space created based on need in the Jewish community. The Jewish community is by age an older population. The Arab community is much younger population, but the Jewish community needs more medical care than the Arab community. And so they created space in the medical industry to absorb almost every skill that is produced in the Arab community in the medical arena. Now, where is this also happening? You see it beginning to develop in the high-tech industry. 7 years ago, the percentage of Arab employees in the high-tech industry was only 2%. Today, it's 9%. It's very fast growth that is beyond what anyone would expect. To jump from 2% to 9% in 7 years, this is almost 5 times more, 450% increase. And the speed is only growing faster, and you can expect it because you can expect it to get faster because if you look at the percentage of Arab students at universities, it increased in the last 15 years from 3.5% of the student population in Israeli universities. Only 3.5% was Arab. Today, it's 19% of the student population in Israeli universities is Arab. If you dig deeper there, you find two interesting figures. One, 2/3 of our student population is female students, which says modernization is not just economic, it's also social modernization. The status of Arab women is changing. 2/3 of our student population at universities is female students. I'm glad to say I have 3 daughters and one son in the educational system. 4 kids at university at the same time. Tough, but proud. And if you go to the engineering departments, 22% of the students of the engineering departments in Israel are Arab. 22%. So again, there is capacity building in the Arab community, but again, the academia in Israel is opening up to absorb this capacity. They're creating the space for this capacity to grow out of mutual interest. So the concept of a win-win, the concept of economic interdependency seems to be working very, very well. Now, how do you combine the 3 theories together and expect that this should solve Jewish-Arab relations in Israel? I wouldn't dare say, as Doron mentioned earlier, it's not enough. It's not enough only to talk about good relations between Jews and Arabs. You need the component of equality. When we change the term from coexistence to shared society, the main ingredient was not just the evolution of the theories, social contact, narrative debate, which we call dialogue, and mutual interests. These are the cross-communal components, but the additional 4th component is to work towards equality. Because if you want a good marriage, you need to have some kind of equality between the pair that is making the household. You can't maintain that hierarchy that I mentioned earlier, because hierarchy results with bitterness and so on. So if you ask most Israeli Jews today, do you support the concept of shared society that has those 2 components, good relations and equality? 68 to 70% of Jews say yes in Israel. It's a solid majority, which is rarely shaken. It can go down a bit 5%, go up a bit 5%, but it's very, very stable, even in government situations. If you ask in the Arab community, the percentages go up to 83 to sometimes 88%. Now, where's the difference? The difference is in what comes first. Most Jews say good relations first. This will lead to equality. So if you behave, we will reward you with equality. That's how Arab citizens see it. Most Jews say, no, let's normalize relations. Let's humanize each other. Let's act as citizens with goodwill, and equality will become a natural outcome. The Arab citizens see the exact opposite dynamics. They say, let's have equality first. Let's prove that we are worth the same in front of the law. We are equal citizens, and the state should relate to us as equals. Jews should treat us as equals. And if that succeeds, then good relations will come naturally. So everyone is holding the stick from the opposite end, yet believing that the 2 things are critical. Both know and believe the 2 components are critical. We were the first organization to actually say it's not this way or that way, but these are 2 parallel tracks. And that's why we continue to work on those 2 tracks at the same time, believing that a true organization that has the intention of really solving the problems has to get its hands dirty in both subject matters. So we still carry a lot of projects that bring Jews and Arabs together, whether it is with younger kids, where we use the social contact theory. It's a theory that is more suitable to younger people. Mostly about culture sharing, sports, those types of arts, those type of activities. Older kids, ages probably 11th to 12th grade, we engage them also in dialogue and debate, but we wouldn't do that with younger kids, because this is something that, as I said, needs a lot of stamina, know-how, and longevity. But most of the time, we focus on bringing kids to talk about commonalities, about the culture of shared space. How do we behave in the bus? How do we behave? How should Jews tolerate, accept, legitimize an Arab citizen speaking Arabic in a Jewish shopping mall? And the exact opposite. A Jew that comes with his kippah on his head to buy hummus in the heart of Nazareth. How should we treat him? If he has his signs and symbols of Judaism, he wears it and he speaks it. And how do we accept and tolerate each other and legitimize each other in a public shared space? We go to the same university, the same public parks, workplaces. So we're focusing on increasing the acceptance level of each other in those shared areas, realizing that more and more shared spaces are being created. With the economic growth in the Arab community, we're beginning to develop what I would characterize as an Arab middle class that is beginning to behave more and more similar to the Jewish middle class, going to cafes and paying $5-6 for a cup of coffee. This is something we didn't do 10 years ago because we thought that's a waste of money. Because for $5 you can buy a whole kilo of coffee and make Arabic coffee for 2 weeks instead of paying it for one cup of coffee in a cafe. But that's part of the culture of a middle class that you develop and you're willing to spend on that, whether it is also the brands that you buy. And this is a new behavior that is beginning to develop in the Arab community, which makes the two populations more and more similar. So we developed a number of programs that try to break that divide. The most important is the cross-sector teachers program. We have programs that pair Jewish and Arab municipalities to collaborate on joint projects, whether it is a joint industrial zone or a joint bus line that might serve both communities, or a joint industrial area, or a joint public park, or a sewage system, where partnership could reduce cost, improve the economy of both sides, or so on. Another area, and I will mention just two more projects and then stop and allow them some time for questions and answers as Sunny requested. The empowerment programs. We're not just for the business of empowerment of the Arab community for the sake of empowerment, but empowerment for increasing capacity to engage in Israeli society and to succeed in Israeli society and to integrate in Israeli society. So two projects I will mention. One is we're trying to improve the quality of Hebrew among Arab pupils. We send Jewish teachers to teach Hebrew, spoken Hebrew, in Arab schools. We have 69 schools into this program out of the 150 Arab middle schools in Israel. And we aim to cover all of the Arabic educational system with this project. We have good partnership with the Ministry of Education. They pay for the teachers' salaries. We develop the pedagogic content. We train the teachers, select the teachers, train the teachers, pair them with local Arab teacher that becomes their mentor, connect them with the municipality, with the parents, what we call the enveloping services to make that relationship succeed and maintain the same teacher for as many years as possible in the same school. So we're not rotating a new teacher every year. And this program is, as I said, the partnership is with the Ministry of Education. The goal is to cover the whole Arabic education system. That's the goal. We're still not there yet. We are in 69 out of 150 schools, but we will get there. A second project, which we identified as a ladder for success or mobility for success, is to get as many Arab students into high-tech industry. One, the Israeli in the high-tech industry needs the brain power, which is maybe not polished enough in the Arab community. and and the Arab community needs the good money that comes out of high tech, working in high tech. So we sorry, we identify the smartest kids in mathematics in the 8th grade, and from 9th grade onwards, they start taking academic courses in computer science. By the time they finish high school, they have 50% of their undergraduate degree, and it takes them 3 more semesters to finish their undergraduate degree by the age of 19 and a half. This way, we guarantee that the best brains go for the best industry or the most needed industry. We get about 120 new students every year. And the goal again is, now we're working in 2 campuses, at Givat Haviva in our own campus, and also in a Nazareth campus. But ultimately, within the next few years, we want to be in 16 different campuses through the Arab community. And not only in high tech, but also in the medical topics, as well as in the finance topics. Topics that have high pay, and there's a great deal of demand. They pay high for people that get involved in them. That's the benefit of the Arab community. And there is a lot of demand for that brain power in the Jewish community. So that's what we do. We are in the last week, we've been very busy. We put out a big campaign in radio and on social media that calls for people to basically put the events that happened in the last month behind them, think forward, treat them as an accident, a bad accident. We got a lot of injuries from this accident. We got a lot of damage for our vehicle in this accident, but it's an accident. It shouldn't change our path. It shouldn't change our road. For the big title, we call it shared society, but in smaller titles, it's about equality and good relations between the 2 communities. So Sunny, I'll stop here. That allows us 20 minutes or so for discussion as you requested.
Thank you so much, Muhammad. I personally learned so much, and we do have a lot of questions. So let's begin with Larry. Larry, I know you've been waiting to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Sonny. Thanks, Mohammed. Yeah, I love when people give numbers, because I'm a statistician and mathematician engineer. So, I like numbers, but I want to dig a little deeper into some of the numbers. Could you help us understand a little bit about the difference of the 4% and the 17%? The 4% are citizens, the 17% are residents.
No, the opposite. The 17% are citizens, and the 4% are residents.
Oh, so 17% when people are able to vote in the Knesset, then it's the 17% that are able to vote.
Correct.
Okay, so the 4% is a relatively small amount that are residents but not citizens. My question was going to be about the path to citizenship. I thought it was the opposite, that there were many Arabs that were residents there that were not citizens. And
No. It's opposite.
Okay.
The 4% are East Jerusalemites and Golan Heights residents. They became Israelis after the 1967 war, the East Jerusalemites. The Golan Heights residents became residents in 1982, the law of annexation of the Golan Heights. Those, at the beginning, they got the right to pass through citizenship process, which was easy. Very few chose to do it, because the East Jerusalemites still consider themselves as future citizens of a future Palestinian state. And Golan Heights residents, the Druze population of the Golan Heights, still consider themselves as future citizens of Syria. That's not the case with the 17% Arab citizens, who have internalized their Israeliness, and they internalized their Israeli citizenship to be as an eternal matter. Today, those from East Jerusalem or the Golan Heights that do want to get citizenship, it is very difficult for them to get citizenship. It's probably much tougher than getting an American citizenship even after 5 years of green card. Here, it's Israel seems to have a policy to discourage them from applying for citizenship instead of encouraging them to apply for citizenship.
Now, if you're a citizen of Israel, then you have children. Your children are automatically citizens then, as in the United States?
Correct.
So is there a dual citizenship kind of approach in Israel?
That's for Arab citizens, you can't be dual citizen. For Jewish citizens, yes, because it happened. Actually, this started changing only only last 15 years or so. You're allowed the dual citizenship. But if you're an Arab citizen, you have to give up your citizenship in order to if you take a second citizenship.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to bounce off that question and to confirm. So the 4%, I know you said they have a green card, some sort of green card to be Israeli, a resident of Israel, but do they have a different type of passport or some sort of a travel document they can go to other countries with?
Yes, they have two options usually. The one option is to get an Israeli something called the document called laissez-passer, that's in French, travel document. It's not called the passport, it's called the travel document. It's a document that usually have a very short expiration date, which is 2 years, that is not renewable in Israeli embassies or consulates. It's renewable only inside Israel. And as residents, they're considered temporary residents. So if you end up in the US and your document expires after 2 years, you can't get back to Israel. You lose your right. I mean, the document is void, it's not valid anymore, and you lose your right for residency back in Jerusalem or in Israel at all. Unfortunately, I know this very well because my wife is from East Jerusalem and she has 3 sisters that got married and live in the United States. And all 3 of them lost their residency rights. And they couldn't come back for a few years until they were able to get an American passport. This is a population that sort of lives in between, that doesn't have a passport. Few of them are beginning to get Palestinian passports. Usually it's something below the radar. So they get it in Ramallah. They leave Israel with an Israeli through Jordan using the Israeli travel document, and with a Palestinian passport, they travel throughout the Arab world, because with that Israeli document, they cannot travel to Arab countries.
Thank you. We also have some other questions that are in the chat. So Carol is wondering, under the new president, and if the coalition government is successful in gaining support, do you think better relations are actually possible now that there will be an input from the Islamic Party? And there is a follow-up question to that by Janet, and she's asking, how and what forms have Arab Israeli leaders taken a public vocal lead in working against individual Arab Jew and Jew Arab attacks? And how does Givat Haviva tackle this issue? So a lot of questions here.
Yeah. So, Carol mentioned president. We don't have president. I mean, we have a president, but he doesn't have executive power. He was elected yesterday, but she probably asks about the prime minister, if we get a new prime minister and a new government. The new president is a very nice and good new president. I believe that he will be giving a strong wind support and power to our work. I had a phone call with him yesterday, and he was very supportive and promised to come to our first annual conference to express his support for this. That's for the president. For the prime minister, the new government that is being formed today, it's the first time there's an Arab party in Israel's coalition. There was a period during Rabin time that he was dependent on Arab parties for his majority in the Knesset, but they were not part of his coalition. The expectations are very significant expectations that their involvement with the coalition might yield a lot of economic benefits for the infrastructure of Arab towns and villages, probably help to improve education, and probably help to improve permits to build homes and not to be forced to build illegal houses that get demolished afterwards. That's where the expectations are. There are no expectations to solve political problems such as eliminating or changing or amending the nation state law, which is a very problematic law that determines that Arabic language is a secondary language when it used to be until 2019 an official language of the state. 2018 used to be an official language of the state. So those kind of changes are not expected to happen, but we might accumulate some additional progress in social economic issues. I believe this will be much more favorable government to our work, a much more favorable government than even the ones that we had. I mean, although I must admit, we've been able to work with almost every government in Israel. We've made it a point to work with every government in Israel. We do consider government at Givat Haviva. We do consider government as our partner and not our adversary. Although they're often causing many of the problems, but still they're the ones that can deliver most of the solutions. Civil society organizations have maybe the duty to show the path, do good pilots, show the way. I invite you to read a document called Roadmap for Shared Society. It's on our website, where we bring our collective wisdom of so many years to say, this is what can be done in education, in economy, in governance, but we're not considering ourselves an advocacy organization. We consider ourselves an educational institution that works from the bottom up, grassroots type of work. It's still going to be, if this government lasts for 4.5 years, as the law allows it to stay, then I think a lot of good can be accumulated in those 4.5 years. If it explodes because of the tension between that Arab party that is part of them with other parties with the Jewish parties, then this could be a very bad thing that we can expect. Now, on the issue of violence, a new poll study that was done by a research institute called Accord last week, it showed that 87% of Jews in Israel oppose violence, including opposing violence of Jewish gangs against Arabs. It showed 83% of the Arab citizens opposing violence, including opposing violence against Jews during the last events. So we still have more than 83% on both sides. That is rational. We have significant portions that are willing to endorse violence. 17% in the Arab community and 13% in the Jewish community. That's a lot. That could put you in danger. I mean, I faced it personally 2 weeks ago, and so it's a lot that we can't undermine it. About the political parties, if you would ask them, they will probably give you the lip service of saying we are part of the 83% that denounces violence. Would they say it in real time when the events are happening? I doubt it. I doubt it because they don't want to, they probably are either too afraid of that 17% who are endorsing violence, and or they don't want to be criticized by them. I hope I was able to answer the two questions with that.
I also see that we have another question from Larry.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm unmuted. Several of the commentators that you see on TV here and the analysts, even from Israel and both the Palestinian side that we're seeing on TV, kind of attributed some of the violence to maybe three major factors, each one of which may be, combination. But the expulsion of some of the Arabs from some of one of the Jewish communities that took place, the end of Ramadan. And thirdly, there was an election that was supposed to take place between the Palestinian Authority, as I understand it, and the Gaza government. And that election was postponed. And the reasons they gave for the the supposition was that election was postponed because they were the PLO was the Palestinian organization was concerned that the vote was going to go toward Hamas. Could you comment on that? And in view of the fact that you gave the 83%, how do you reconcile that? That, there was this fear that Hamas was going to take over, and become the dominant party between, the two separate Arab areas. And does that reconcile with the 80% that you were talking about as far as nonviolence?
Well, I mean, we're mixing the agendas a bit here because, for example, the issue of Hamas is not something that I took into consideration. That's the study I spoke about was about violence inside Israel between Jews and Arabs in Israel. The Arab citizens that were polled are citizens of Israel and not the West Bank and Gaza. So if you ask the question in the West Bank and Gaza, probably the numbers will be of very different nature. When we spoke about violence, we did not speak, the question wasn't about the rockets coming from Hamas or things like that. I would dare say, Larry, that the massive majority of Arab citizens that went out to demonstrate, they cared less about Hamas. They were demonstrating because of two things. One is the buildup of marginality and the slow process of equality and the slow process of integration. Although I'm the first one to celebrate the successes I mentioned, but for the massive majority of the population, they see the half empty and not the half full because they pay the price of being half empty. Arab kids get a third of the budget per education than that of a Jewish kid. And despite that, the families put a lot of money in private education to be able to make it to universities afterwards. The social economic suffering is very, very there. So those were, I would say, the undercurrents that existed. The spark of the violence happened because of what happened in Jerusalem. And yes, it is within the last 10 days of Ramadan, which are called Al-Ashr al-Awakhir, the last 10 very holy 10 days, because two events happen there. One is something called Al-Jum'ah al-Yatima, the Orphan Friday, which is the last Friday of the month of Ramadan. And there's a duty for worshippers to go to Jerusalem and pray there. Just to give you an indication, 2 years ago, before the corona, 350,000 worshippers went to the Al-Aqsa Mosque to pray in Jerusalem that day, that Friday. This year, there were a lot of obstacles and also fear among people to go there because of the events at Damascus Gate, a lot of violence, and few times the police that week went into the mosque and from the perspective of the worship, disturbed their peace. The second important day within those 10 days or second important event is on the 27th of Ramadan, which was on Saturday. So the Orphan Friday was Friday. The following day was 27th of Ramadan. It was a Saturday, and it has an event called Laylatul Qadr, the Night of Destiny, which is the holiest night in the Muslim calendar. And again, in this night, usually you get about 350,000 worshippers in the mosque. The police decided to prevent Muslim prayers from reaching Jerusalem. I don't know if you saw the photos of people getting out of the buses and walking up the hill towards Jerusalem because the police blocked the the line for the bus, and people simply poured, as you know, those that were capable to walked for 4 to 5 hours. But all the rest, the elderly and children and the women, they had to turn back. Many of them were not even allowed to get as far as the hills of Jerusalem, reducing the number of worshippers that night to 72,000 instead of the expected 350,000. And that created a great deal of bitterness. Sunday was Jerusalem Day, where Israel was celebrating unification of Jerusalem. And that was celebrated through a parade of thousands of Jews freely parading in Jerusalem. So the 2 previous days and nights, limitations on the Muslim worshippers, and the 3rd day, the celebration of absolute access to Jews in Jerusalem, including East Jerusalem. And the police tried to sort of add another show of force by going into Al-Aqsa Mosque that Sunday, throwing sound bombs and throwing tear gas inside the mosque. It's considered desecration of the mosque, injuring about 303 people within 2 hours, simply just to show force. And and almost half of those injured.
Yeah.
Out
Could you
of
go back,
4,000.
could you go back for a second to the delay in the vote or the postponement of the vote? You don't think that had much significance as far as the incitement as fear, at least the way it's been portrayed?
Inside the Arab community, inside Israel, this had zero effect. The Arab community could care less because, first of all, we do not vote for those elections. They do not relate to us. This was an internal Palestinian Hamas PLO tension. This probably was the reason why the rockets were thrown. I mean,
that's what I was going to get to, is that apparently that was, but that was the major escalation was because of the rockets being thrown. Had the rockets not been thrown, I don't think things would have escalated. I mean, I'm not pointing fingers at one versus the other. There were probably, poor dealings on both parts. But the fact that the elections were postponed, and then Hamas said, "I'm going to try and show who's really I'm just using, the phrase."
I'm agreeing with you on that, Larry.
And that was the escalation. I mean, 3,000.
It was one of a number of factors, probably having maybe 50% of the value in comparison to other factors. I mean, the other factors maybe were 3 or 4 factors, but that one factor of Hamas, I would say it had 50% value into the tension.
All right, going back to a little bit of inside of Israel now, were you surprised at all in certain communities that had a joint Israeli-Arab population, so-called mixed community in Israel, of the way the violence spread in those communities?
Well, I was surprised by the volume.
Went back to social justice and said that doesn't seem to be working, getting to know each other. And this seemed to be almost proof that it wasn't working.
Well, there was a government, I mentioned the Authority for Economic Development of the Minorities sector, which now in retrospect, we know that it didn't work in mixed cities. It didn't attend to the needs of the Arab communities And those communities in the mixed cities were marginalized, one by the government and second by their own municipalities. In municipalities that had positive mayors, such as Nofa Galil, for example, in the north, such as Carmiel, we didn't have any issues. We didn't have any problems. In municipalities where the mayors tried to make political gain out of it and they became part of the incitement machine, and some local politicians used this to try to score some political points, they started feeding racist, polarizing statements and actually calling for people to go out for confrontations. I think there was mostly failure of leadership with those. And now when we look at it, the police arrested over the last month 2,140 demonstrators. And they say that 85% of them had criminal records before. So we're not talking about the mainstream Arab community coming out for the confrontations. It's, mostly the ones that were arrested in due time, in the real time. They were 85% of them had criminal records. Now, this population, we knew it existed. Most of its criminal performance was inside the Arab community, which was aching for years from police negligence, which allowed this population to grow, this crime to grow. There was always the statement, and I think Doron, who's on this call, heard me say, the state probably will not wake up to handle the problem of violence in the Arab community and crime in the Arab community as long as it is an internal problem of Arab citizens. And it could happen only, the state will handle it only if it spills over to the Jewish population. And this time it did. This time it did spill over. And the pain from the criminal activities in the Arab community for the first time, it's a pain shared by the Arab citizens themselves and by the Jewish citizens. But this is exactly the reason what leads me to say it's probably easier to get out of the mood of the crisis that we had because it can be associated with those kind of segments of society and less associated with the mainstream. I'll give you probably two indicators. One, after October 2000 clashes, there were almost 17,000 Arab citizens that lost their jobs over a period of 6 months. In this event, we had less than 200 people, 200 reported cases. In October 2000, Israeli businesses started even boycotting Arab towns and villages, and the opposite. In this event, 70 top business leaders, including the heads of all the banks in Israel, all the insurance companies, all the food companies, issued statements calling for calm, calling for end, and calling for embrace as quickly as possible. In this event, we had more than 50% of the mayors, Jewish and Arab mayors, meeting together in their regions, issuing statements and actually standing in the intersections between them to say, it's over, enough is enough. We shouldn't allow this to happen. The margins of society should not be the ones that control the will of the majority that wants to live together. So there are good indicators that we're going to bypass this crisis very, very quickly. There was a book written in 2010, October 2010, that evaluated our Jewish-Arab relations between the clashes of October 2000 and October 2010. Professor Sami Samuha from Haifa University wrote it, and he titled the book, The Lost Decade in Jewish-Arab Relations. In this case, I think we probably have a lost month and not a lost decade, which means that yes, the events were difficult, radical, violent, shouldn't have happened within Israel, but there are a lot of people making sure to put it in the right place because everyone has something to worry about. Everyone wants to make sure that the ship stays stable between Jews and Arabs in Israel.
Thank you, Muhammad. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It is 2:07, so we'll be finishing here. I know there are a few other questions, but hopefully we'll be able to have, whether it's Muhammad or somebody else from Givat Haviva, join us again in the future. And I just wanted to invite everybody to join us every Thursday at the same link at the same time. Next week, we'll be hosting Jacqueline Goldstein. She'll be talking to us about the Israel Tennis and Education Centers Foundation. I hope to see everybody there. Thank you, Muhammad, and thank you, Daron.
Thank you. It was a wonderful program and we got so much out of it. We really appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you.